Je déclare la séance ouverte. Bienvenue à 75 réunions du Comité permanent des affaires autochtones et du
ceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Pursuant to standing orders today, our meeting today is in hybrid format. Members are present either in person or on Zoom. The proceedings will be published on the House of Commons website, and the webcast always shows the person speaking and not necessarily the whole room. For those participating virtually, I'd like to outline a few rules, and then I'll come back with an apology and give you a sense of what's happening this afternoon. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting in French, English, and Inuktitut. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen for those online of either choosing floor, which is the real-time language being spoken, English or French. Please select your language now, and if interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately. Raise your hand, get my attention, jump in, and we'll make sure that interpretation is properly restored before we resume the proceedings. For members in person, we know the drill. We don't have any guests here, so we know what to do. Please wait until I recognize you by name, and please address your remarks through the chair, although we're a pretty collegial and an informal group here. Please speak slowly and clearly to allow for our interpreters to follow what's going on, and when not speaking, please mute your own microphone. And we'll try to keep a list of speaking order. For those who are joining us for the first time, when we get into the round of questions and answers, the members are responsible for choosing where they direct their questions. And so if you have something to say, you can always raise your hand, but I leave it to the member to decide if they're going to another person or not. I also use a quick timekeeping tool here. The yellow card means 30 seconds left in your allotted time, and the red card means time's up. Don't stop mid-sentence, but wind up your thought when we hit the red card. I would like to apologize for the delay in getting started today. We were planning on a vote, and the vote is still expected with a 15-minute bell. So when that happens, we will have to suspend until after the vote. So that could be up to about a 25-minute interruption, and I apologize for that. But with that, we're going to get right into our witnesses today who are joining us on our land restitution study. And so we have Chief Commissioner Celeste Haldane of the BC Treaty Commission, Harold Calla, Executive Chair of the First Nations Financial Management Board, Larry Innes, Barrister and Solicitor, and I'm missing some, Mark Smith. Okay, also from the BC Treaty Commission. So welcome to each of you. We'll give each of the organizations 5 minutes for opening comments. And so who would like to go first? Perhaps if we go with Chief Commissioner Celeste Haldane. If you're ready, the clock, we will get started. And you'll have the floor for 5 minutes.
Right, Squell, good day. Thank you for the invitation. And just to note, the Treaty Commission is an independent mechanism that oversees the treaty negotiations process in British Columbia. We facilitate the negotiations between First Nations, Canada, and British Columbia. We are the only tripartite legal body to oversee reconciliation and are mandated to facilitate the modern treaty negotiations process between the parties, provide funding to First Nations in negotiations, and provide public education. There are currently 30 modern treaties across Canada, 8 in British Columbia, and 7 that were negotiated through our process.
Sorry. I'm going to have to stop you just for a second. The bells, of course, now that we've got started, are now ringing. And so I do need unanimous consent from the committee to allow you to finish your opening comments. If we don't have unanimous consent, then we'll have to suspend at this point. If we do have unanimous consent, we can go through perhaps the finishing of your statement, and then we'll have to suspend until after the vote. So do members agree to continue with the opening statement? Okay, I'm getting agreement. So please proceed, and you still have 4.5 minutes left to go. I apologize.
No problem. Thank you very much. So treaties are a true sharing of constitutional sovereignty, and they contain provisions for restitution over a variety of areas such as fair access to lands and resources, self-governance, lawmaking authority, and jurisdiction. Modern treaties also operationalize the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I want to take the opportunity to recognize and applaud the federal government for the tremendous work undertaken to strengthen the relationship and shift the negotiations with First Nations in the BC Treaty negotiations process. We are moving beyond historic legacies of crown denial, unilateralism to a new nation-to-nation relationship based on the recognition of rights, reconciliation, respect, cooperation, and partnership. There's been a number of policy changes and transformations within our process. One is the recognition and reconciliation of rights policy for treaty negotiations, which is what we call the Triple R policy, which was co-developed with First Nations in the negotiations process, British Columbia and Canada. And this policy replaces both the comprehensive claims policy and the inherent rights. And a big part of this policy is that cede, release, surrender, or the extinguishment of Indigenous rights is not a part of the modern day treaty negotiations process. It's also not a part of our current and modern day Indigenous Crown relationships. Also, there's been some substantive changes when it comes to Section 87 of the Indian Act tax exemption in the context of modern treaties. We also have both provincial and federal UN declaration legislation, as well as action plans, Canada's collaborative self-government policy. We have loan forgiveness in budget 2019 and moving to contribution funding in 2018. So all these notable policy shifts have transformed the negotiations process and expedited negotiations. We have a tremendous opportunity to conclude treaties in British Columbia, and we have 4 tables representing 8 Indian Act bands that can reach a negotiator's handshake within the next 6 months and initialing within 12. And those are the Kitsilus, Kitsum-Kalem, Comox, and Tumuk Treaty Association, which Tumuk represents 5 nations. And the Triple R policy supports self-determination, self-government, and ensures modern treaties are adaptable living agreements and capable of renewal when necessary. They also explicitly state that the Triple R policy and the negotiations are grounded in the recognition of Indigenous rights and title and is a framework to implement the UN Declaration. And these treaties will be the most innovative to date, given the fact that they're going to incorporate all the policy shifts that we've seen. And there are concrete examples of restitution within the BC Treaty Negotiation Framework and modern treaties. For instance, the 4 tables who are closing have negotiated available provincial crown land to be included in their treaties, as well as federal crown lands to be included. For instance, there's some Department of National Defense and Indian Reserve lands. Another example of restitution is the implementation of self-government. That is a form of restitution, thereby supporting the modern treaty nation to restore their lawmaking, rulemaking, and jurisdiction over their lands and resources, and being able to strengthen their language, culture, and communities by being able to prioritize their community needs. As we know that there has been a lot of damage since time immemorial, First Nations were self-governing. But upon contact and colonization, a lot of that was taken away through defunct policies such as the Indian Act. But we have an opportunity to change and shift and move towards supporting restitution and reconciliation by completing modern treaties in British Columbia. This will provide for concrete realization of investments in negotiations and a new path forward for a stronger future for all Canadians. Concluding these 4 treaties will undoubtedly establish nation-to-nation relationships and partnerships that are grounded in recognition and reconciliation, will enable faster and effective closing for the next set of advanced negotiation tables, and again, is a pathway towards restitution. We will continue to urge the entire federal and provincial family to understand their role in reconciliation and their role in concluding modern treaties in British Columbia, as well as to implement the Triple R policy. As well, momentum needs to continue, especially when treaties and agreements reach Ottawa. Given the fact that the Triple R policy applies to all government departments and agencies, we encourage departments to review their authorities, and where they see the opportunity to innovate and update their authorities to reflect a new nation-to-nation relationship, we encourage the federal government to do so. If not, then there's no progress, which means status quo, which creates uncertainty for Canada and British Columbia, as well as First Nations. This also goes against the very definition of restitution. That concludes the Treaty Commission's opening remarks. Heichka. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those opening comments. And I should say how much we appreciate the work that your office does. I reside on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Kwantlen, Katzie, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo nations. I just wanted to acknowledge that those are the territories I live on in British Columbia. Colleagues, I also should have mentioned we did do the sound checks with everybody for today, and everybody has passed. So we're hoping everybody can stay with us. We do now need to suspend. We'll come back to opening statements from the other witnesses. When the vote is done, I need to allow 10 minutes once the vote is called for members to get back to committee. And at that point, we will be able to resume. So we'll be out for probably about 20 to 25 minutes. We have resources to support us today until 6 o'clock. We cannot go beyond 6 o'clock. I hope our witnesses are able to stay with us for the duration of the meeting. If we get through our rounds of questions first or earlier, we'll definitely let you go. We have some committee business we'd like to try and get to as well. But for the moment, colleagues and guests, we are suspended. our witnesses have been able to remain with us, and everyone who is joining us online has successfully passed the test for audio for interpretation. So with that, I see I'll give Mr. Calla a chance to get his headphones on. And we have Mr. Calla and Mr. Ennis still for their 5-minute statements. So whoever's ready. Mr. Calla, are you ready to go? Oh, here. Or Mr. Calla, if you're ready, we've resumed. And so if you're ready for your 5-minute opening statement, I'm happy to turn the floor over to you. And thank you so much for your patience to our witnesses. I'll wait to start the clock until you start speaking, and you're on mute at the moment.
Okay, you're talking to Harold, I'm presuming.
If you're ready for your 5-minute opening statement, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to participate today. The restitution of land is a significant and necessary part of reconciliation. This is a pathway to inclusion for Indigenous people and away from a potential outcome of extinguishment. Indigenous people have a strong connection to the land, and this defines Indigenous peoples in Canada. According to a recent study released by Environomics Institute, 81% of Canadians see inadequate Indigenous control over their lands and resources as a barrier to reconciliation. More and more Canadians are seeing the need for Indigenous communities to have more jurisdiction over their traditional territories as stewards of the land. It should be noted that Canada sees reconciliation as part of its action plan to the implementation of UNDRIP. However, we need to understand that the transfer of land alone will not bring improvements to our communities. Canada must be prepared to invest resources to develop Indigenous-led responses to managing our traditional territories. We need to build capacity in our communities to properly manage increased Indigenous jurisdiction over our traditional territories. The significant opportunity Canada has before it in the extraction of critical minerals is going to be facilitated by engaging with Indigenous communities and recognizing they have economic, environmental, and governance interests that need to be included in decisions affecting their traditional territories. The public service needs to facilitate this capacity building with resources to help with this transfer towards co-development with Indigenous communities. I often speak to FMB staff and ask them to have an imagination in their minds of a young girl growing up in a northern remote community reserve. How does what we do improve her life and help her fulfill her dreams and goals and the dreams and goals of her community? This is our opportunity here to do some of that. I think that's the vision we have to keep in mind as we consider these matters. You can't develop healthy, sustainable Indigenous communities in keeping with UNDRIP unless you have land and jurisdiction over it. You need to be recognized as a government with the appropriate powers and fiscal capacity. An expedited ATR process needs to become a reality, not a consideration. First Nations increasingly look to expand their communities to respond to growing populations and new economic opportunities. Irregular boundaries, such as the one I experienced in Attawapiskat, is a situation where one home may be on reserve, but at the same space on the other side, it is not. This is simply out of First Nation communities, and many First Nation communities are on land and not able to construct homes to meet the needs of those communities. The need to consider economic opportunities is important. Reconciliation must mean healthy communities with economic opportunities to support the creation of healthy communities through economic activities in their traditional territories. We should not be afraid of land back as a concept. You should see it as a way for communities to overcome poverty and support the ability of the Canadian economy to be competitive on the international stage. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll now move to our final opening statement. Mr. Ennis, so when you're ready, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Larry Innes, and I'm a partner at Althius Clear Townsend. We're a national law firm with offices in both Toronto and Yellowknife. Our practice is focusing on advancing the rights and supporting the evolving jurisdictions and authorities of Indigenous governments across Canada. And I'm pleased to be joining you from Samba Cay in the Chief Dry Geese territory of the Yellowknife's Dene. My work has been in trying to reconcile the complexities and the conflicts inherent in what our Supreme Court described more than 20 years ago in the Haida Nation decision as the fact of prior sovereignty of Indigenous peoples over their lands and resources with the asserted sovereignty of the Crown. And as a white Canadian, as someone who has the privilege of working for clients in the negotiation and the implementation of modern treaties and in self-government agreements, as well as, to Mr. Calla's points, working to create real wealth for communities through impact benefit agreements and other constructive partnerships with industry. I've got a perspective on what restitution means. I also have served as an advisor to the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, which is a national organization that's working to advance Indigenous-led conservation and guardians programs across the country. And I understand the committee has already heard evidence from ILI in the testimony of my colleague Dati Tetso, who appeared before this committee in May. Also relevant is my own perspective as a fourth-generation Albertan whose pioneer ancestors settled in the shadows of Ninestako or Chief Mountain in the Blackfoot Confederacy in the late 1800s, just outside the boundaries of what is now Waterton National Park, in what was then still the Northwest Territories. And like many Canadians, I'm trying to understand my own history in this context and what it means to become a treaty partner. And to this, I offer that there are many pathways that we can follow to answer these questions. For me, it's largely been through a love of the outdoors. I grew up hiking, fishing, and hunting in the foothills and coulees and mountains of southern Alberta. But I've moved to the north in my 20s, and I've had the opportunity to spend most of my life and most of my career deeply immersed in Indigenous communities, where I've learned from the, I would say, patient teaching of my Inuit and Dene teachers what it means to be on the land or to be of the land. For many Canadians, those are remote possibilities. It's through our national, provincial, and territorial parks that people really get an opportunity to form these connections to land. And these iconic places showcase certainly some of the best of what Canada has to offer. And they've created lasting memories for generations of Canadians. But these places, our national parks, while a model that we share with the world, also have a deeper and darker side. Few Canadians know of the histories of Indigenous dispossession that have followed the designation of places like Banff, or the consequences that have followed. And just to cite a single example, when Wood Buffalo National Park was created in the northeast corner of Alberta and the southeast corner of the Northwest Territories, the government assumed that the lands were taken up and that all Indigenous rights to that area were extinguished. Delisole peoples in particular were driven from the park, their homes burned, and their belongings left behind. Members of the Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation were reduced from being independent and economically self-sufficient people to being beggars on the margins of their own land in less than a generation. These events are history, but they're also a metaphor for the ways in which our understandings of our relationships to land are shaped by the narratives that are unfortunately all too one-sided. We celebrate our parks, we celebrate our nature, but too many Canadians don't understand the past and the present experience of Indigenous dispossession. So when the committee is looking at restitution, when the committee is considering what this means, it's complicated, and necessarily so. There are solutions, but they have to go deeper into our history and to look at some of the solutions that have been devised in comparable jurisdictions. We can look, for example, to recent examples in Australia, where iconic national parks like Uluru and Kakadu have been handed back. We can also look to similar examples in Canada, where the recognition of Indigenous rights and the sharing of jurisdiction with Indigenous governments are occurring in the context of Indigenous protected and conserved areas. And these are only the beginnings. So I'd like to thank you for your attention. And Masicho, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your opening comments. And days like this, I wish I was on the member side of the table. I'd spent 34 years with Parks Canada, living and working in some of the places that you've talked about, and have visited parks and internationally, and the colonial construct that we find with them is quite fascinating. And your reference to coolies also takes me back to my growing up years in southwestern Saskatchewan. You don't hear that term very often. We could also talk about Quonsets and other things, but we'll save that for another day. We're going to get into our round of questions now, and first up for 6 minutes we have from the Conservatives, Mr. Viersen and Mr. Schmale. Mr. Schmale and then Mr. Viersen. So the floor is yours.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to our witnesses for appearing. Start with Mr. Kalla, if I could. I think this is like your 998th meeting or addressing committee at this committee and others. 2 more, you get a free pizza, so I wish you luck for those 2. So in all seriousness, though, I want to thank you for the contribution you have made in speaking with this committee over the years. And now we're talking about land back. I know something is close to your heart and something you advocated for as long as I've known you, and of course long before that as well. Let's talk about what your nation is doing, Squamish, helping out the housing situation in British Columbia with their land. Let's start with that, and I'm going to get into some of the comments you made just a few moments ago.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for raising Sanok, the Kitsilano lands. These were lands that were taken from us, that were subject to a specific claims lawsuit that was part of the CP Rail right away that we eventually got back because of the Osoyoos Supreme Court of Canada decision on the residual interest. Our community members were put on a barge, the village was burnt to the ground, and we were shipped up to the Squamish Valley. Having that land back and giving us the opportunity to develop it in cooperation with the City of Vancouver and Metro Vancouver to develop rental housing, something desperately needed in downtown Vancouver, and also to be in a position where we could allot a certain number of those units back to our Squamish membership, to the point where there will be sufficient units that on the basis of an average family size of Squamish, it will become the second most populated reserve in the Squamish Nation. And that is restitution. That is bringing back our people to the lands that we knew, to being in a position where we've righted a wrong in our view, and that we're in a position where we're also responding with economic activity that benefits the entire Lower Mainland and provides accommodation to those who previously might not have been able to get it. So this is in my view, one of the more positive outcomes in an urban setting of land back that can and should be examined as a positive, that land back shouldn't be feared, and that First Nations, and there are many across the country who can replicate what Squamish has done, can make a significant contribution to local communities by having the opportunity and removing the impediments to have their lands developed. These lands would not have been developed as easily as they have been without the support of CMHC, and that should also be recognized. The need to get access to capital is a significant component of what's needed. When I talk about just giving the land back is not enough, it is because getting the land back without jurisdiction and access to capital is a challenge.
And that segues into exactly what I wanted to ask next, talking about the access to capital, but also the jurisdiction over that. Maybe you want to elaborate a bit more about what you mean by that. And looks like you have a visitor there. And then we can talk about the access to capital component, which is key.
Okay, well, I think getting land and examining what the economic opportunities are on that land, I think is an important consideration in looking at restitution. Getting land back that carries with it responsibilities, but no economic opportunity can be a challenge to First Nation communities. And I think that that's something that we need to understand and respect, that we need to have access to the kinds of properties that can promote economic development in a way that reduces the cost of poverty into our First Nation communities and provides opportunity to our citizens to actually be employed and work. Too many times we find ourselves with membership who are becoming educated, becoming professional, can add great value to our communities, but we don't have the economic opportunity for them to come home and work. And I think restitution needs to look at these as an objective of restitution, the ability to support this kind of activity. Now, the challenge we face is that the scope of economic opportunity far outreaches our current capacity to access debt. And we're talking, like in Sanok, we're talking about $2 or $3 billion worth of development. Well, without the support of organizations like CMHC to support construction financing, that becomes increasingly difficult. And so access to capital is a critical piece. And it's one of the reasons the Financial Management Board is proposing in our work plan this year, and it will soon release a scoping study on the creation of an Indigenous Development Bank. What we need to do is to be able to bring Canada's balance sheet to the table together with the private sector and create a pool of resources that can respond to the quantum of economic demand opportunity that's facing First Nations in this country.
Quickly, I think I have like 15 seconds. 20 seconds? Okay, thanks, Chair. You're generous. Let's quickly talk about, let's go back to the housing. Just maybe we can reiterate how quickly you were able to get that development going based on the current bureaucratic hurdles that exist around Vancouver.
Well, I think, one of the benefits that the nation has is it does have its own governance structure around these matters and has had for years. Many may be familiar with the Park Royal Shopping Center, which has been on Squamish Nation land since the 1960s. So we have a familiarity and a concept and a process for regulatory development. And we're able to expedite that in a way that municipalities don't seem to be able to. And I'm not going to try and explain why. But our ability to get to final investment decision happens much more quickly, and there's much more interest in realizing those opportunities on our First Nation land. The other thing that we also did in Sanok is we utilized one of the tools that was created by the First Nation Commercial Industrial Development Act, which Squamish supported, and that was to bring the Tenancy Act onto the Squamish Nation Reserve for the period of the lease so that we could create the same kinds of measures that tenants might have off reserve, on reserve. So all of these tools are being used by the Squamish Nation to support this economic development activity, which is why I referenced the fact that you need to have more than just land. You need resources, access to capital, and jurisdiction.
Okay, and we're out of time on that one. We're going to go now to Mr. MacLeod, who will have 6 minutes on the clock.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters today. Very interesting discussion for sure. My question is for Larry Ennis, and I'm glad that Larry has been able to join us here today. I've run across Larry many times in many different communities, so I take special interest in this presentation. My first question to Larry is, as a negotiator, what are the biggest challenges you have identified with the existing comprehensive claims process, and what changes can the Government of Canada make to improve the process?
Thank you for that question, Mr. MacLeod, and good to see you as well. This is going to take way more time than we have today, but if I could
6 minutes.
the first principles down. One is that it takes too long, the money comes too late, and the degree to which Canada's previous versions of this policy have insisted on certainty in a world that is only becoming less certain has created a degree of paralysis in negotiations where there's such a desire to get it right for now and for forever, which is almost an impossible task, that those have created delays. As you know, the Government of Canada has recently adopted new policies which are based, as my colleague Commissioner Haldane has indicated, on the idea of rights recognition and the idea of treaties being documents that can be renewed over time. It seems to me that moving towards those policies and embracing them more quickly amongst all levels of government, so that it's not simply the federal government leading on these with the territories and the provinces being drug kicking and screaming into the discussion, those would also help move these conversations forward in something resembling real time.
Thank you for that. I just want to pick up on something you mentioned about timing. I've heard from Indigenous governments in the Northwest Territories that the lack of available federal negotiators are slowing down the process on negotiation. Is that something you've witnessed? And does that mean the government needs to address the human resources gap within the departments so negotiating meetings can be more productive and happen with greater frequency?
In fact, this is a problem of both the number of negotiators and the number of tables that are being staffed, but also the degree to which these negotiators are, I will say, no longer as empowered as they once were. In the early days of negotiations, going back to 1970s, 1980s, negotiators they had the trust of cabinet. They were empowered decision makers who were there to make deals on behalf of government. We have unfortunately moved into a system now where, and I mean no disrespect to my colleagues, but I often lose track of the number of federal officials who come to tables as chief negotiators only to be shuffled out some months later. That is no way to build relationships. That is no way to solve complex problems. It bureaucratizes and systematizes things that are frankly far more fundamental, that need to be far more relational and far more built on a senior relationship between leaders of governments towards solutions that can be achieved within the life of governments.
My last question, can you just speak a little bit about the importance of supporting Indigenous stewardship of lands and how conservation economy is a key component of economic reconciliation?
Thank you. And that's a question that I take great pleasure in going on again at some length on. The transformation that is occurring across Canada as Indigenous communities from coast to coast to coast reassume their responsibilities over lands, stepping forward as guardians, as stewards, as monitors, and reassuming their former roles as people who lived on those lands and brought their knowledge and their laws to the management of those lands is creating both opportunity with good jobs that are meaningful and accessible to people in the places where they live. They no longer have to go south or elsewhere to work. And it's also bringing new investment in both science, innovation, knowledge sharing, and that spirit of innovation, which is going to build Indigenous economies in places where commercial opportunities of the scale that we see in Squamish don't necessarily exist, but meaningful jobs can be created. We know from the work that is being done both here and in other jurisdictions that these jobs have incredible multipliers, that the social impact of a well-paid guardian's job in a remote community transcends that individual and their family and extends to the entire community, often with a multiple of, for every dollar invested, $4 to $6 returned in social value. Those are investments that we can and should make.
Okay, and we're out of time. I thought we were in a 5-minute round, so I gave Mr. McDonald some, or McLeod some wrong information, but we're at the 6-minute mark there, so sorry about that, Michael. We're going to go now to Madame Gill. Vous avez 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses, Mr. Innes, Mrs. Aldan, Mr. So, Mr. Kala, you said that, of course, it was not enough to ensure to give land back, but also we need means to be able to develop. You spoke about inclusion as well, and you also talked about the Indigenous Development Bank, and you mentioned that you would be tabling a brief later this year or perhaps early next year. But as a member of this committee, I'm very interested to hear you speak right now. So I don't know if you could present to us, perhaps not the entire content of that, but a brief idea of what this means, what it could signify as well for First Nations during this land back process.
Well, thank you for the question. And I am happy to speak to some of it. First of all, I will say that we've hired international experts who have worked on the creation of Indigenous development banks all around the world to help us craft this report. The intention is to identify the viability of such an enterprise in Canada and what its purposes might be. First Nations have never been allowed to develop wealth or have a balance sheet. We don't have the fiscal powers that other governments do, and we don't have access to the same kind of access that the governments do in the capital markets easily. Certainly, we've created, through the Fiscal Management Act, the First Nation Finance Authority that has used the oversight framework of the FMA to raise close to $2 billion on behalf of First Nations in New York over the last number of years. And we used to think that was a big number. Not anymore. The scale of economic development opportunity that's being considered now is in the multi-billions of dollars. The First Nations Major Projects Coalition and the Financial Management Board recently just returned from London and Paris with the Minister of Natural Resources to talk about natural resource precious metals extraction. And the Major Projects Coalition identified that they have $19 billion worth of shovel-ready projects in First Nation communities that they support ready to move. First Nation communities want equity in these entities because they want to be sitting at the boardroom table to have influence about how these things are being managed and undertaken. They also want to ensure that there are economic benefits flowing to them. Because we haven't had the opportunity to develop wealth, Canada will need to step forward and support through some instrument or loan guarantee access to some of the resources that are going to be necessary to acquire the equity. But I don't believe that it needs to provide it all. I think we could enlist, and our indications are based upon conversations that we have, the capital markets to also become a player. And we want to do this in an aggregated way so that you don't have to start at square one in the project development process, that there is a place where you can go where these matters can be considered. The biggest value in this is getting to the final investment decision more quickly. And that would include economic participation by First Nations, and the private sector might understand better how that could be achieved without adding cost to the project. We think that's important. And I think an Indigenous Development Bank can help do that. The other thing that an Indigenous Development Bank can do is provide support to First Nation communities where they might not otherwise get it. I know that in British Columbia during the 2008 to 12 period when LNG was such a big factor, many of the communities in northern BC that were being approached and given referral letters didn't have the capacity to analyze what was being undertaken. And we actually supported them through the Financial Management Board with the creation of the Major Projects Coalition. But we're now at a point where these are significant interests. And I think what the international community is looking for is a clear indication that Canada has got its house in order with regards to Indigenous issues, that there is Indigenous inclusion, that there is a pathway that doesn't take a decade to get to reach a final investment decision, or we're going to lose that opportunity again. I think that the creation of an Indigenous Development Bank creates a risk management tool for the government to protect its investment that may not have to be there for the life of the project, but to get through the critical phase of proof of concept. I hope that answers some of the question, man.
And there's still 30 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Kala, do I have a little bit of time left?
5 seconds.
D'accord.
Okay. Well, for Mr. Innes, he mentioned his experience in national parks, but also I think he is the one who said to not fear land back, and that he had other examples that showed that there was success in this, notably in Australia. Could he provide other examples that we could rely on, or at least would allow us to obtain information to avoid similar mistakes, or for those who fear this land back process?
Answer that briefly, Mr. Innes. We are near the end of the time, and Madame Gill may need to pick this up in her next round of questions. But I'll give you about 30 seconds.
Sure. The two examples I would cite in Australia would be Uluru and Kakadu. Uluru was handed back 20 years ago. It's a national park in the center of Australia. Kakadu, on the northern tip of Australia, was handed back in 2022. And both of these are as part of what they call native title settlements in Australia, which we would know as land claims in Canada. And in those agreements, the Indigenous government maintains ownership of the land, but then enters into long-term arrangements with the state to manage those lands going forward under a partnership or shared decision-making model. Here in Canada, we've done very similar things. Parks Canada led the way with the Haida in what is now Guayhanas, where it's a shared decision-making structure, where joint jurisdiction over those lands is recognized by both parties. And of course, in the settlement of modern land claims, you see the large transfers of lands from Crown governments to Indigenous governments, or the recognition of their prior ownership, depending on the perspective that you take, which then lead to the development and institution of Indigenous laws over those lands and the opportunities to create both jobs and wealth from those lands for those communities as part of Canada.
Okay. And we're going to have to cut it off there. Thank you so much. And now we'll go to Ms. Edlut for her 6 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank everyone here because what you're reporting is very good to hear. First, I want to ask Celestine in regards to the bill that the Conservative passed to address the housing crisis. Their solution is to sell off federal lands to private housing developers. Can you tell us how this might be an infringement on the rights of Indigenous peoples in areas where the land in question is unceded or there are ongoing treaty negotiations? Can this bill be an infringement on the rights of Indigenous peoples in areas where the land in question is unceded or there are ongoing treaty negotiations?
Thank you. First, I wanted to acknowledge that that's how you end up in court. When you have legislation like that that's passed, and I think there are better ways forward. Picking up on Harold, what you had mentioned with regards to the development that your nation is undertaking. Other nations are also undertaking similar development. So I'm going to reflect to the Tsawwassen Nation, who is a modern treaty nation, who is building in between 8 to 10,000 residential units to again address the housing crisis. And why I think that's so significant, because local communities are coming together to come up with solutions that are meeting local needs. And when you have that type of thought process, I think it's better reflected versus having a top-down legislated process. I would be very concerned with regards to the disposition of federal crown lands when you have Indigenous nations that have not settled treaties, that have an ongoing connection to that land. To me, that just, and this is the lawyer in me that's coming out, and don't hold that against me, but to me, I think that is how you end up in long litigation, areas of litigation, which will not result in addressing the actual issue, which is if we wanted to address the housing issue, I think there's better ways to move forward. And again, it's about, restitution is what we're talking about. We're talking about land back. And when we have Indigenous communities that have been ostracized and removed off their lands for the settlement of Canada, kind of flies in the face of what we're actually trying to achieve when it comes to reconciliation and building that new relationship based on trust, mutual respect. So I see a number of issues and challenges with that, particularly, given the context in British Columbia, which is where my expertise lies, where we have 50% of the First Nations currently negotiating modern treaties. So we have a huge level of uncertainty when it comes to lands and access to lands and resources, as well as ensuring that Indigenous nations are put into, are able to have control over their territories. And this is outside of just the reserve lands. They have access and control and jurisdiction and lawmaking authority over their entire territory. And so that also includes federal surplus lands or federal lands that we haven't had that negotiation about. We haven't resolved that issue. I think that would be very dangerous, but that's just my perspective. And I think there's ways forward, which would be negotiations.
Yes, thank you for your response. Next person I want to ask is Larry Ennis. It's good to see you. I recognize you. I want to ask you this. I proposed a bill, number 326. If this bill was passed, it would amend the Territorial Lands Act to make sure there is free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before staking claims. And they should be consulted and given informed of their rights to vote. Take, for example, the mining companies would say there was a study done on the mining explorations. And in your opinion, how is free, prior, and informed consent related to land rights? Does your community give free, prior, and informed consent when being consulted on a project?
Nagarmik Misilut, I think your question hits on a really important topic, which is that when we think about land, so often we just look at the surface. But much of the wealth in this country is, of course, generated from minerals, from oil, from gas, from all manner of things that are below the surface. And we've had since Canada, a system where those minerals and their wealth are purportedly reserved to the Crown. They're given over to mining companies and to developers through a process of mineral staking that just last week, in a decision of the BC Supreme Court, was found to violate the fundamental premise of consultation that exists in Canadian law, and to fall far short, of course, of the standard of free, prior, and informed consent as articulated in the UN Declaration. So I think I'm on fairly solid ground when I say that our system of subsurface resources, and when we talk about restitution across the country, reforming the mineral tenure systems to provide, in first instance, for the consent of affected Indigenous peoples in deciding what and where minerals can be explored and developed, and most importantly, in then sharing in the wealth, in the incredible wealth that can be derived from minerals as we look to a future economy in which critical minerals and other things are going to be playing an important part of the wealth, not just of Canada as a nation, but of all of the nations that make Canada.
Okay, yeah, we're going to have to stop there. Thank you. Our next round is a bit shorter, and I was quite generous in this round in allowing a bit of extra time. This time we're going to have to be a bit tighter on it. So we'll start with Mr. Viersen, who has 5 minutes on the clock.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, if I have the indulgence of the committee, I'd like to just put on the record or give notice for a motion, unless there's unanimous consent to let me move the motion. But we had earlier this year, we had a community of Gruard or Capuino First Nation. Their church building was burnt down. This is not the first church building in my riding that has burnt down in the last few years. And so I'd just like this committee to basically state their opinion and that be reported to the House. And so the motion would be as follows, that it be reported to the House that the committee condemn the arson and attacks of over 80 churches across Canada. In particular, extend their condolences to the communities of Gruard and Capuino First Nation with the loss of St. Bernard Church, one of the oldest churches in Alberta, a piece of history, a building that holds memories for generations of community members, and this committee reaffirm the freedom of religion and assembly and call for those responsible for these attacks to be brought to justice. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have some questions for Mr. Harold Kalla. Good to see you again, sir. You speak about these, you use this term fiscal powers often. One of the fiscal powers of any government is taxation. And I'm just wondering if you have any comments around the fact that the Indian Act denies the ability of self-governments to use taxation as a form of fiscal power.
Well, I'm not, to be quite frank, I'm not sure that it does. You can pass bylaws, but you get concurrent taxation in that case, and that really defeats the purpose of it. I think that as we look at modern day self-governments, you have to realize that a government by its very nature is usually something that has defined boundaries and empowers to exercise fiscal measures within that defined boundary. I think we need to be in a position where we recognize that First Nation governments can't be truly self-governing unless they have those same kind of opportunities, which doesn't mean that we necessarily add another layer of tax to the Canadian tax system. What we mean is that other orders of government vacate the field so that First Nations can move into that field, much as what happened in British Columbia in the area of property taxation with the provincial government passing the Indian Self-Government Enabling Act shortly after the 1988 amendment to the Indian Act that clarified the ability for First Nations to use property tax on reserve. So I think that self-governments by themselves have the ability then to collect revenue using their fiscal powers. That enables them access to the capital markets, much like the government of Canada and other provinces and municipalities do. I don't know that the government of Canada and others have to go to the bank and fill out a credit application to get a loan to meet their needs as they determine fit. First Nations as governments have been as what I call pay-as-you-go government, where you get cash money and you pay for whatever you get in that fiscal year. And while maybe many Canadians would wish the federal government did that as well, they don't. And the The fact is that it's up to us to make the decision in Indigenous communities if we need to provide the infrastructure to be able to go to the capital markets and finance, to invest in our economies the way we need to invest in them. So I think that fiscal powers are central to the concept of self-government and the options that need to be contained in there, but they don't necessarily mean and should not mean that we're adding another level of tax. It should mean that other orders of government are vacating the fields of tax where we exercise authorities.
I think you made a little quip about balancing the budget. I'm not sure about that, but thank you for that as well. Just around I'm pretty certain though that in the Indian Act, of which your community may or may not be under, there is a moratorium on taxation. I thought you've explained this to me before. Can you just explain a little bit about that?
Well, I mean, we exercise property taxation on reserve, but we don't tax our members' housing. We tax the Indigenous interests on reserve land. So I wouldn't call it a moratorium. I would call it the exercise of fiscal powers. In much ways, the provincial and federal governments offer many different incentives through their property taxation system to encourage certain types of activities that they would like to pursue.
Sure.
Thank you for that round. We'll go now to Mr. Batiste, who will have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's good to see you, Celeste and Mark. I'm looking through the notes, and when we're looking at Aboriginal title, BC has played an integral role in both the Delgamuukw case and the Chilcotin case. I'm wondering if you could comment a little bit about what the restitution or the recognition of Aboriginal title has meant to those nations, and if there's been any kind of economic growth that has been resulted from the recognition of Aboriginal title for those two nations.
Very good to see you as well. So I think the economic component is integral. And of course, that comes out of Delgamuukw. The fact that title lands have an inescapable economic component, which means that in part of the decision-making, a part of having lawmaking authority and jurisdiction, we also have to have the ability to create our own economies, but also at the same time, be able to control those economies. I know Chilcotin has been working quite diligently on implementing their title, and of course have taken steps and measures and have entered into agreements and negotiations. Now, I'm not privy to exactly what's happening with regards to their negotiations, but their implementation of title. But I do know that they are, again, coming at it from a very, of course, they have title, which means they have ownership. They have jurisdiction, and I think that's really the key component to when we're looking at restitution and land back. The other nations that you mentioned, some are in the negotiations process and have been moving through not just the treaty negotiations, but also they have a number of economic development opportunities within their territories, and of course have a say and jurisdiction over how those developments will be undertaken. I think that really underlines not just having Section 35 rights that have been recognized and affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada, but we also have two additional frameworks, which is the federal and provincial legislation on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. That again provides another framework for reconciliation and restitution. So back to an earlier question with regards to free, prior, and informed consent, that comes out not just out of case law, i.e. the duty to consult, but the out of the declaration. And I know British Columbia is modernizing a number of our laws and policies, but doing it collaboratively with First Nations in British Columbia. And I think that's a really integral step when we're looking at how are we going to continue to build our futures together in ways that are meaningful for everyone. Some are in treaty negotiations, some are pursuing economic development opportunities, like as Harold had mentioned, we have a major projects coalition, and they're doing excellent work within their communities. And again, it's about having a say over your territory, over resource development, but again, it's not necessarily about no, it's about how do we get here and how do we get there together.
Thank you, Celeste. And just let me steer this conversation a little bit. And a lot of the talk that we've heard about land back, we've heard about the stewardship, we've heard about protecting the resources. We're talking about land and land back. But what does it also mean to the oceans and rivers that are so vital to British Columbia? Can you talk about what you think land back would mean to the protection of rivers and the ocean?
Absolutely. So, not to mention that I'm a Sparrow from Musqueam and grew up commercial fishing and spent pretty much my entire life on the waters in the ocean. That's an integral part. So looking at not just land back, it's about how do we have fair access to our other resources, i.e. marine resources, migratory species such as, wildlife, salmon, birds. That is another component to land back, is looking at, again, how do we have control, decision-making, management decision-making, over our resources. Again, it's going to take that fiscal investment that is going to be required. It's about building capacity in nations to be able to, again, enforce their laws, enforce jurisdiction on their territories. That is a major gap right now. I think the Guardians and some of the programs that are out there are excellent resources for communities to build that capacity. But I also think we need to go one step further, which is, how do we ensure that, modern treaty nations or other First Nations have the ability, similar to government, Canada and British Columbia, to be able to enforce their laws, whether it's on land or whether it's on their marine territories. And so I think that's another integral conversation as this land back and restitution continues to continues to be studied.
So Celeste, I only have about 30 seconds.
We're done now.
Oh, that's the
30-second warning.
Ready to stop?
Yeah, we are. So we're going to go now to okay. Madame Gill, who will have 2.5 minutes. And the 2.5-minute rounds go quickly for those of you who have been here before. No.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would have liked to come back because the question could be for each of the witnesses. Of course, this issue of the speed oftentimes comes back, and this can be translated into a risk of concluding agreements too quickly, with the risk of going too slowly. So could I hear you speak, Mrs. Aldan, on that? How do we make sure that we have to go forth quickly and strike a balance? Thank you.
Well, I think when you have the political will, which we do have that alignment both federally and provincially in the province of BC, you've got to strike while the iron is hot. We have a number of policy changes. But again, it's not about perfection. It's about building a relationship and a partnership moving forward and having, and this is a little legalistic, but having those opportunities for orderly renewals and being able to check in on your relationship is how a treaty, a constitutionally protected treaty, will continue to evolve and continue to breathe life into that partnership. And we do have some of those policy developments in the province. I think that needs to be a whole of government, a whole of the federal family to implement that across, across the country, not just BC.
Monsieur Innes, est-ce que vous voulez...
Mr. Innes, do you have an answer to that?
I would simply echo my colleague, Commissioner Haldane. The perfect should not be the enemy of the good in these scenarios.
Et pour mes 20 dernières secondes, monsieur.
And for my last 20 seconds, Mr. Kalla?
Sorry, you're on mute, Mr. Kalla.
Circumstances change over time, and these all need to be living documents, in my view. But it starts with a recognition of rights and title, and it starts with a recognition of self-government, and that we're a long way from being able to say that Canada has fully implemented the right of self-government under Section 35. And so I think the principle is that you're going to recognize it. You got to stand up and say, we believe in this and we're going to do it. We're going to start here. Where we end up is going to be a matter of process and negotiation. And, as someone once said to me, when do the negotiations with Indigenous people end, Harold? And I said, never. When do they end with you?
Great, thank you. And we'll go now to Ms. Edloot, who will have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I have a question for Celestine. The United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In 2021, the federal government passed the UNDRIP Act, which aims to bring Canada's laws in accordance with UNDRIP. Have you seen any meaningful difference in the way Indigenous peoples have been engaged regarding land back since it became law in 2021?
Well, thank you for your question. With regards to the treaty negotiations process in BC, it has expedited negotiations, but again, there have been a number of policy shifts. I would be reticent if I didn't state that not every ministry and agency has been perfect in adopting the whole of government approach to the UN Declaration, as well as the RRR policy that we have in treaty negotiations. And I would encourage those particular agencies, and I do think that they are coming along, but Department of National Defense, I believe, would take a vested interest in ensuring that they are living up to their whole of government approach when it comes to land back and discussions about land back with Indigenous partners. Department of Fisheries and Oceans is one of those areas that, again, they've been undertaking a lot of work to work towards restitution. However, they seem to be a little bit behind. And so, when we're looking at a whole of government approach, everyone has to adopt the UN Declaration. And as I stated earlier, the best way to operationalize the UN Declaration is through a modern treaty, as well as ensuring that the sharing of jurisdiction and power and vacating jurisdiction is where the Crown needs to vacate jurisdiction is going to be integral. And that's also part of implementing the UN Declaration.
Great, thank you. And that's the end of the 2.5 minutes. Colleagues, that takes us to just after 5:30. We do have some committee business that we need to get to. And so I'd like to end the witness portion of the meeting now and then go into hopefully brief committee business. With that, I'd like to thank our witnesses. I know this was at least the second time that we tried bringing you together. Many of you, I think all 3 of you had been invited in the spring, and we were interrupted by votes. And again, today we were interrupted by votes, but I really appreciate your persistence and the value of the testimony that you brought to us today. If you have any additional thoughts you'd like to send to us, we do take written briefs, so you can send up to, I always say 10 pages, but apparently this committee says 5 pages, so if you can be very tight in additional thoughts, or if you want to push it a bit, we'll accept 5-ish pages. But I really want to thank each of you for being with us today and for your patience as we got through some House business around today's discussion. Also wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Lobb, who is here today with us on the Conservative side. And with that, colleagues, we'll suspend, and Madame Gill and Mr. Pawlowski, if you're able to join us through the new link for the committee business, we'll get going as soon as we get everybody back in. Thanks, and we're now suspended.
you.